I'd like to open this part of my reflection with a poem by Fannin Holland called "Forgive Me If I Do Not Believe You." Fannin Holland is an African-American slam poet from Canada. I'm sure I am not going to do it justice. I could not find a video of this, but I thought the reading was quite appropriate. Forgive me. Forgive me if I do not believe you. Forgive me if I do not believe you when you say all lives matter. Founding fathers fled Europe in conflict, landed and settled in conflict, pushed their violent notion of democracy all the way across the Pacific Ocean in conflict. So forgive me if I do not believe you. When sports fans use violence to riot at the hockey games, you forget it. When police use violence to snap a man's neck, you ignore it. When citizens use violence to burn down communities, you condemn it. When a mother uses violence to get her son out of the streets, you applaud it. When forefathers use violence to colonialize native land, you whitewash it and then stand on privilege and proclaim that you do not understand violence. Forgive me if I do not believe you. It seems to me you have an intimate understanding of violence. How else will you be able to manipulate the narrative so well? You could not stand Robert Johnson, so you gave us Elvis, Clapton, and Led Zeppelin. You could not stand the Jitterbug, so you gave us the Lindy. You could not stand Esther Jones, so you gave us Betty Boop. It's a cultural bait and switch all over again. You could not stand our native tongue, so you gave us the old funkin' wagonals. You could not stand our ebony gods, so you gave us Christianity. You could not stand civilizations far more ancient than your own, so you gave us a transatlantic lesson in white supremacy. You could not stand Black Lives Matter, so you gave us All Lives Matter. Forgive me if I do not believe you when you ask why did he run from police instead of why did they shoot him in the back. Forgive me if I do not believe you when you are more concerned with broken windows than you are with broken necks. Forgive me if I do not believe you when indigenous women disappear into apathy just as fast as bullets disappear into black bodies. Forgive me if I do not believe you. All Lives Matters is not a solution, it is a rebuttal. Black Lives Matters is an awareness of the struggle, a remembrance of stolen bodies and lost lineage. All Lives Matter is a whitewashing of history against the blackboard of history. This is 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 history repeating itself. We are the sons and daughters of history. So forgive me if I do not believe you. We are the sons and daughters of severed limbs and torn out tongues, black fist, cracked skull, shackled feet, burning lungs, broken hearts, broken backs, and broken homes. We are the sons and daughters of dreams deferred. We are the sons and daughters of history. So forgive me if I do not believe you when you say all lives matter, because history teaches us that some lives clearly matter more than others. End of reading. Pretty intense. But it's easy sometimes to ignore the issues of race in our society and in our lives. Many of us have the privilege of being able to ignore it in our day-to-day lives. But it's hard to ignore the struggles that our country has about race. And we shouldn't ignore the struggles of our fellow citizens, particularly poor African-American citizens. And I've spoken before here from the pulpit about the issues of police violence towards people of color. I've spoken about Ferguson and how the culture of mistrust between police and the community have been built up over the years of harassment and a systemic levying of penalties, both physical and financial, to support a white-dominated bureaucracy. I've talked about systemic racism and how here in this congregation we have studied the new Jim Crow, the mass incarceration of people of color, and how that has allowed the power structure to profit from incarceration. How being arrested allows control of prisoners' lives both during incarceration and still after they have paid their debt to society. And how this practice of incarceration undermines and destabilizes the family unit, which increases the perpetuation of poverty. And then we had Baltimore. African Americans have had enough. What we first saw as stirrings in Ferguson, we now start to play out on a larger scale in Baltimore earlier this year. We saw what, in my opinion, were the beginnings of a rebellion. The result of an incident in which Freddie Gray, a nonviolent offender, runs upon seeing the police, and then his arrest for having a small knife, and then the death of Freddie Gray while in police custody. Baltimore, a city with a large African American population, as well leadership in their government, has been steeped in the cycle of poverty for a long time. Now, if anyone has seen the HBO series The Wire, I highly recommend it. I think the show gives the best depiction by far I have seen of inner city urban life. And in this case, that show's about the city of Baltimore. And it shows a perpetual hopelessness of certain embedded ideas of how things are and how they are to be. But I want to also point out in the 4 years prior to the death of Freddie Gray, over 100 Baltimoreans had won financial settlements with the city due to police brutality and civil rights violations. So it's clearly a systemic event there. And these were just the ones that were, of course, reported and acted upon. And so again, we had a tipping point where a community says enough is enough. Nothing is changing for their better. Nothing in their history tells them that anything has changed for the better. And they've lost hope of anything changing for the better in the future. Someone, I forgot who, said, hope and justice walk hand in hand, end quote. And when you lose one, you lose the other. If you lose hope, you'll lose justice. If you lose justice, you'll lose hope. And then the condemnation, and so the rebellion. And then there was a condemnation of the rebellion and a call for nonviolence. And I was moved by something a writer, Tanisha Coates, responded to this call for nonviolence in an article in the Atlantic magazine. And he wrote, and I quote, "When nonviolence is preached as an attempt to evade the repercussions of police brutality, it betrays itself. When nonviolence begins halfway through the war with the aggressor calling time out, it exposes itself as a ruse. When nonviolence is preached by the representative of the state, while the state doles out heaps of violence to its citizens, it reveals itself to be a con. And none of this can mean that rioting or violence is correct or wise, any more than a forest fire can be correct or wise. Wisdom isn't the point. Disrespect is. In this case, disrespect for the hollow law and failed order that so regularly disrespects the community." End quote. Now, I've often heard asked, why did they burn down their own neighborhoods? And the truth to that answer is these people felt they had no stake even in their own neighborhoods. That they didn't own it, they had no control over it. They had no investment in it. And when you isolate a group of people, harass them, starve them of resources, opportunity, education, and mostly through policies, eliminate hope for a better future, at some point rebellion is the result. And so you may ask, why am I discussing Baltimore here in Davenport, Iowa? far away from inner city challenges, in a place that by comparison has very little racial strife. So first I'm going to admit, yes, that is one of the advantages of living in a less urban environment like the Quad Cities. It's quieter. It has less poverty, less violence, less racial tension than more urban environments. That's all true. It's also a place where we can have an impact on how the community responds to injustice, such as when the events in Ferguson were happening, the Davenport Police Department put on a training to make their officers more aware of racial discrimination, and I commend them for that. And yet we know through a study by St. Ambrose that there is still racial profiling that occurs here. We know there is a color bar at the hiring line, whether due to implicit or explicit racial bias, which leads to long-term unemployment for people of color. We know that the incarceration rate, we know this, of people of color is significantly higher than Caucasians, even though people of color make up a much smaller percentage of our population. And because they are a smaller percentage of the population, it is easier to ignore in the Quad Cities. I'm reminded of Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man, where he wrote, and I quote, "I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows. It is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me." End quote. Which brings us to the question of why Black lives matter versus all lives matter. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, we say. And I have spoken about the word inherent before, right? Inherent worth is not lived worth. It is just that, inherent, that within each human being is a potential for worth and dignity. Inherent worth and dignity means it is there within all of us, waiting to be nurtured, waiting to be developed, and waiting to be lifted up. And that is our role as a religion, to help create an environment where everyone's inherent worth and dignity can reach their maximum potential. And that is the same for police officers who cannot see the harm they cause, and for the oppressed who are harmed. But we say Black lives matter because although it is true that we all need to be aware of systemic racism and how we all play a part in it, it is Black lives that are in the most jeopardy. It is Black lives whose potential for worth and dignity are being killed. They're being killed, incarcerated, and incapacitated. It is Black lives that we need to acknowledge as having inherent worth and dignity, as a way of acknowledging our awareness of their suffering. This is not to say that other people of color and Caucasians do not suffer and are not in need of help. Of course not. But this is to say that due to our history of subjugation through slavery, through Jim Crow, through mass incarceration, that we have a burden. We have a debt to be paid to African Americans to say their lives matter to us. That the outcomes of their souls matter to us. That their inherent worth and dignity matter to us. And although we personally may not have done anything personally to cause any person specific harm, we have to admit that Caucasians have benefited due to the way our society works. Now I say this not to make anybody feel guilty, although as my grandmother would often say to me, if that works for you, that's okay. I say this to remind you that we need to help balance the scales, to change the structure of society so that all people have a chance to reach their potential. And we need to use our power to work for and work with those who do not have power. We need to use our power to help lift up others and help lift up each other, whoever needs help. We can look at the world as a zero-sum game where in order for us to have inherent worth and power, we have to deny someone else worth and dignity and power. Or we can look at the world where everyone has the opportunity to have worth and dignity. And I choose the latter, where everyone has worth and dignity. Cornel West wrote, "Justice is what love looks like in public," end quote. So, under the specter of all of the turmoil in our country, let us respond with love. That we as a religious people are called, yes, called to respond to the need for racial justice, just as we have been called and have responded to the need for gay, lesbian, and transgender justice in the world. We must have a conscience for all people who suffer. But where to start? There is so much to do. As Unitarian minister Edward Everett Hale wrote in 1902, "I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." End quote. And so part of our call to justice, our social justice group mired, mass incarceration, racial equity, and drugs, has been working with Quad Cities Interfaith on issues of restorative justice. And currently we are studying alternatives to sentencing, such as mental health courts and drug courts as alternatives to prison. So I just want to say, I usually don't comment on current events immediately from the pulpit until I've had time to thoroughly sort of digest and vet all the circumstances. However, I didn't feel I could do a service on race this week and not comment about what happened in Texas, where at a pool party, police were called to respond to an altercation. I just want to show a short clip of what happened. I do want to forewarn you, if there are any young children here, there is some foul language in this. So, just if you want, if that bothers you, hold your ears. It's mostly from the police.
Well, there, get on the ground. I told you to stay. Get your asses down on the ground. That's it. Right now you're staying. Don't make me fucking run around here with 30 pounds of goddamn gear on the sun.
It was much longer, but that was, you got the gist of what was happening there. And it was a very, very complex situation. And I just want to touch on a few issues there. First, the police officer that was shown there had just come from two calls earlier in the day. One was a suicide and one was an attempted suicide. And that was just prior to being dispatched to this pool party. That reportedly involved an adult and a child and a teen fighting. So I'm not forgiving his actions, but I just have to say he should never have been there in the first place. Having worked as a chaplain and as a minister, I can tell you the emotional toil such incidents as particularly suicide and death can have on a person. And he clearly was not in the right frame of mind to handle this incident. Too often we are called on, or we feel we have to tough it out in such situations and not admit our own pain or our own inability to act. So let us recognize those circumstances when they occur in our lives and in the lives of those we work with and the lives of those we care for, and realize when we need to stop. Secondly, I want to point out that there was an assumption made by him that it was the children of color that caused the problem that day, although there is no way, it's not even clear today really who caused the initial problem. I've read half a dozen different versions of what started the event. But the officers made that assumption when they came upon the scene. They didn't have any of the white youth sitting on the ground. They didn't have any of the white adults sitting on the ground. Remember that it was a white adult who had originally started the altercation. In fact, they allowed some of the white adults to jostle, if you saw there, the youth that were there. And not forgetting his unforgivable actions of pulling a gun on unarmed youth and his treatment of the young girl in the video, what he was really pissed off about, if you listen, was that he was forced to run after them. He mentioned it in the clip I showed you, and he mentioned it several other times in other clips that, I just didn't need to show you 10 minutes of this. So the question is, why do people run from the police, right? Especially in cases here where they're clearly innocent people. And why do police seem to be more violent and become more violent when that happens? Remember the incident with Freddie Gray started when he ran from the police. Why run? Well, particularly in poor neighborhoods, police presence is constant. In her book, Learning the Art of Running, sociologist Alice Goffman writes of a conversation with a young adult that she had been following, and that person stated, and I quote, "If you hear the law coming, you run away from them. You don't have time to think, okay, what do I have on me? What are they going to want from me? No, you hear them coming, that's it, you're gone. Period. Because whoever they are looking for, even if it's not you, 9 times out of 10, they will probably book you." End quote. And this is the fear that is created with the war on drugs, where police constantly harass people of color for no reason, shredding our Fourth Amendment rights to privacy from search and seizure, and it creates a culture of fear, a culture of running. And it is shown that if police have to chase someone, they are more likely to respond violently. If for no other reason than their adrenaline is just pumping. As you saw, this officer, he did his little tuck and roll because he was running so fast in that scene there. And this war on drugs has created a culture of suspicion. So I ask us let us take steps to just stop. To stop running, to stop harassing, to stop creating fear in the population. Let us stop and recognize how we as a society, where we can create and can recognize and overcome our biases. To recognize our limits and be compassionate with ourselves and with others. To stop and recognize the inherent worth and dignity within all. And to treat all with loving compassion. Now I'd like to end this reflection with a little poem of my own, something I wrote for the service today called Ode to My Children. I always told my children, who are now grown men, not to cower down to might and to stand up for the right. I'm blessed they are alive and have a chance to thrive. I was ignorant their plight was hard and how authorities played their cards. I didn't tell them they should obey, always do what they say. The boys in blue, it's just a job they do. Facing it every day, a job driven by fear. Can't imagine what they see, can't imagine what they hear. But the videos I see make me question, are we free? I see the after, not before, it's true. I may not know the score. But shooting a man in the back is cowardly and then unnecessary, and that is a fact. Pushing a child in bikini to the ground, sitting on her, pulling her hair, have we forgotten how to love? Have we forgotten how to care? It is wrong. Who am I to say? But due to my privilege, that's the burden I must pay. I was born to write, I was born to speak. I can't be muted and I can't be meek. Maybe if I stand up to help end this racism, maybe in the long run it'll be a better place we all live in. Maybe I stand up to the gun in my face, I stand with my brothers and sisters of another race. Maybe I stand up with the face to the gun because maybe next time, maybe next time it'll be my son. My sons. They are all my sons, wrote Arthur Miller. He was condemning the capitalists, he was condemning the war killers. The dead are all my brothers and sisters. We have to say more than just, hey, we'll miss you. We have to stop the notion that people of color always cause the commotion. We have to stop the third grade to prison pipeline. We have to stand up and say it is way beyond time. We have to stand up and walk as allies, or otherwise we allow others to perpetuate these white lies. I know I worry about my sons, it's true. And I do worry about the men in blue. To have such fear with the need to kill creates a heart with hate all filled. So let's find love in our heart. Let's all do our part. Together, if we walk, together, if we talk, the world will change. That may be unsettling, that may feel strange. The Buddha says we must awake, and it is true. There is much at stake. So now I ask you to stand with me, so together we can make the world see that love has a power. Love can make hatred cower. That love dispels fear and brings restorative justice near. And now I ask you to stand with me, to rise and